Away from Jack Fatih, Barisha! Splendid! What a strike from Brendan Sandilands! For the rolling! Oh! That's a special! That is simply brilliant!
Welcome wherever you are around the world to Football Access, the show about the A-League and all things football in Australia. My name is Gabriel D'Angelo. It's great to have your company. And with me in the studio, 1.5 metres apart, George Grossios and Bern Merkel. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, everyone.
Round 23 started on Friday with Brisbane winning 1-0 against Central Coast. Perth and Sydney had a 0-0 draw. Melbourne City and Western Sydney drew 1-1. Wellington Phoenix defeated Melbourne Victory 3-0. Newcastle blew past Adelaide 3-0, while Western United had the bye. Now the ladder, Sydney remained clear on top, followed by Melbourne City, Wellington, Brisbane Roar, Perth Glory and Western United. Below them is Adelaide United, Western Sydney, Newcastle Jets, Melbourne Victory and the Central Coast Mariners. So what game was the match of the round for you guys?
I particularly enjoyed the performance put up by the Wellington Phoenix again. We've been singing the praises of Ufuk Talay now for a number of weeks, and they admittedly took on a very weakened, I dare say burnt a dispirited Melbourne Victory.
Yes, Melbourne Victory again, absolutely disappointing. I mean, when did they concede the goal? Third minute, I think, already, you know?
Second minute.
The second minute, yeah. And then also the second goal, I mean, this long cross into the 16-yard box, and then he just has to do the header being with his back to the goal. So I thought that should never happen. That's something I try when I play with my friends, you know, in the park where you have a long ball and then, okay, get the head out there. But yeah, absolutely disappointing. On the other hand, as you said, George, again, really very nice how Wellington Phoenix is playing at the moment. For me, the team of the season. Still, Ufuk Talay, the coach of the season. So, but I want to add my game of the weekend, if I'm allowed to talk about that as well.
Ahead.
So actually Melbourne City versus the Western Sydney Wanderers for a few reasons. I think the first one was the clearance of,
Yes.
I don't know, the season, maybe even the decade.
Play save of the century, Bert. It reminded me, and sorry to interrupt you, it reminded me, and I don't like promoting other sports, but it reminded me of Heath Shaw in the 2010 Grand Final replay against St Kilda, where he smothered Nick Riewoldt walking into an open goal, who thought he had all of the time in the world, which is exactly what Simon Cox.
Yes.
That's exactly what he did. He thought, I've got half an hour. I have half an hour to just stroll in. So do continue, Bernd. Sorry, I stole your thunder.
No, but that was.
And for mentioning that, it's a shame it's your last show, George. So
No, sorry.
we'll need a new person to fill in. So yes, go Bern.
But based on that, so that definitely was one highlight. But also the goal for the Wanderers. What a brilliant goal it was! That long cross from. Now I'm missing his name, my Western Sydney Wanderers favorite player.
Mitch Duke.
Yeah, Mitch Duke, you know. And then, of course, the German had to be involved as well, Nikolai Müller. And it was really outstanding. And then Tate Russell with his first goal ever at the A-League.
Good goal too.
Yeah. So that's why, I mean, it was really very nice. On the other hand, then he was the one that got the penalty then for Melbourne City, right? Jamie McLaren scored
From hero to villain, Bert.
Yes, exactly. So in total, that match I think was very, very entertaining. Also for both teams, really looking into the playoffs. I think with Melbourne Victory, coming back to your game, George, they are just done for the season.
Well, yeah. I mean, Melbourne Victory, we briefly touched up on it last week, but Melbourne Victory, one win in the last 5 games. Surely, I mean, there's got to be some talk about whether Carlos Salvatore will stay around for next season. What do you guys think?
Well, I think there'll be a clean out of player personnel. I can't see Toivonen staying. I mean, as it is, he has a 2-year contract anyway. Yeah. I can't see him agreeing to a contract extension, even if one is offered. They have to seriously look at their defence. I think they have to also look at players such as Elvis Kipchoge, who couldn't score to save his life. And it's unfair to blame him for their lack of goals, but they're just not getting any goals out of their front three. It doesn't help, of course, that they have Robbie Cruz out. It doesn't help that Naboo hasn't captured the form he showed for Newcastle before he left to go to Newcastle, Burnt.
Tim Hoagland, not to forget him, right? I mean, when he was playing, which was really the vast minority of the games, he clearly showed that he can be somebody to make the whole team better, but it was not often enough. So it reminds me a bit of Georg Niedermeyer. I mean, he was struggling last season at the start, but whenever he played, then he, I think, showed some good and decent performance, but didn't play enough. That's why Melbourne Victory didn't keep him. But looking back, they might have thought, without saying it loud, maybe Niedermeyer might have helped them, because the defense, it's nice to score goals, but with those up front, if you can't even score, then at least you should try to defend as well as good as possible. But Melbourne Victory next season will be very, very interesting. I mean, with all the circumstances at the moment, who knows what will happen with the next season, when it will happen. But let's assume we have a regular A-League season next year starting in October. I think we will see a completely different Melbourne Victory team.
Gabriel, I have to say too, the absence of Cole Valeri has left a gaping hole. There's a clear lack of leadership.
Yep. And Antonis, he had a lot of spark in the midfield as well. Barbarousis as well. I mean, there's a lot of absences, a lot of outs, but I think you're right in saying that Melbourne Victory, I think that there's going to be a clear out, because Ola Toivonen, he looks bored. He does. He looks like he just no longer wants to be there. And I've said this for a while. I think that Lawrence Thomas, this is not a criticism of him at all, okay? Because I think that Lawrence Thomas and Paul Izzo and Jamie Young of Brisbane Roar have been some of the most consistently best goalkeepers in the A-League. I think that Lawrence Thomas, more than Andrew Redmayne, actually deserves a go with the Socceroos, because he's been consistently good, whereas Andrew Redmayne has only been good the last 2 seasons because he's had John Crawley as his coach. But having said that, I think that when you see someone like Lawrence Thomas, like, I'm not a Victory fan, but I can only see his body language. When he plays in the A-League, there's this sort of sense of, I won't say apathy, but of just going through the motions. But when he plays in the Champions League, he's really, is like what he used to be. He's just really intent. He's got this leadership presence around him. He's doing these amazing saves. I think he's an extremely good goalkeeper, one of the best young goalkeepers in Australia at the moment. And he's sort of like, I just want to have a really, really good game in the Asian Champions League. That way I can get out of here. That's the kind of countenance that he has.
Yeah. Absolutely. And
some of the other players have too. But I think you're right. I think there's going to be a massive clean out. I think that Adelaide United, I mean, we touched up on it last week again. Another really bad loss at home, 3-0 against Newcastle. It's one thing to lose against the Western United, who have a decent team. But Newcastle, they're second last. And they've got a new coach, Carl Robinson, 4 games, 2 wins, 2 draws, is doing well. But to lose in the way that they did so badly at home against Newcastle, what were your guys' opinions of that performance?
Well, Bern, you've been hearing whispers of player discontent behind the scenes, and it's becoming clear every week they are not playing for their coach.
No, not anymore. Honestly, I was surprised how well they actually performed during, let's say, start and then mid of the season. I mean, they're also the FFA Cup winners, right? Yeah. So, I mean, they had some really decent, good matches, and I was actually a bit surprised compared to what I've heard and what was going on behind the scenes, that they were in a good shape. They had a good chance to get into the playoffs. They looked decent, and then suddenly it all turned around. So everybody was saying, okay, let's see what's happening in January when I'm missing out my names. The young player with the Olyroos from Adelaide United, Riley McGree. Yeah. So they said, okay, if he's away, let's see what's happening to Adelaide then in January, right? But that was not the main reason. And if you see a coach like Gert-Jan Verbeek sitting there and criticizing his player, Ryan Kiddo, in front of the whole media, right? And that, I think, also shook the whole team, because this is something no team would accept, that one of their players is actually criticized in front of the whole media and saying things like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen with him next season. And I mean, for the objective spectators, it might be quite entertaining to listen to Verbeek in the press conference, right? But I don't see that the move from Marco Kurz to him was actually a win, and I would really like to hear the honest opinion of Adelaide's people in charge if they now regret that Marco Kurz is not there anymore.
Well, Verbeek did have a reputation. I mean, he was known to be a little bit crazy, a little bit eccentric. So, I mean, they surely would have known that this guy would have been a little bit off the rails at times. But I'm glad you mentioned the FFA Cup, because the way that Adelaide destroyed Melbourne City in the final, they played some really scintillating football. I thought, wow, Adelaide United, they're back.
Yeah.
I thought the glory days will be back again, but they've just fallen off badly, just really, really badly the way they've been playing. It's like there's no structure.
And they've uncovered some really promising talent, the Toure boys.
Yeah.
They're exciting players. So there's obviously some quality and there's some talent coming through. But Verbeek hasn't been able to harness that in this back half of the season. And you have to ask the question, why have the wheels fallen so badly? Play discontent, tactics, injuries, suspensions, all of the above?
Yeah. It seems like they're, like what Burns said, that they're not playing for their coach. But, I
think that situation, criticizing one player in particular in front of everyone, is really an absolute no-go. And from that end, we will see what's happening next year. I think it will also depend on if they make it to the finals, if the club will give Verbeek another chance, but I'm very, very doubtful.
Yeah,
I mean, you contrast Verbeek with a Kevin Muscat, for example, who would always back his players. Even if they performed terribly, he would always do it behind closed doors.
Yeah.
But in front of the media, he was always loyal and would deflect.
Yeah.
He would take the pressure himself, make it all about him perhaps being at fault rather than the play. So perhaps Verbeek, different mindset, different approach.
Seems like I think that Adelaide, like you said, I think that they are definitely regretting replacing Marco Kurz with him, but that's their problem they'll have to deal with for the rest of the season. But from moving on from the A-League to the W League, the W League season is about to finish with the grand final between Melbourne City and Sydney FC playing this Saturday behind closed doors in Melbourne. Melbourne City is going for their 4th championship in a row. George, you've been following the W League for a while now. Melbourne City, they look like they're going to be making even more history, but Sydney, they're looking good too. Do you think that they're going to ruin the party?
I would predict another comfortable victory for Melbourne City. They're perennial champions and they're the pace setters, and full credit to the City Football Group for backing their women's team as well. They've provided resources, facilities, and the women have obviously taken that up. They've rejoiced in the fact that they're treated as professionals.
Yeah.
And if the players are happy off the field, and clearly they are, their performance then is reflected on the field. And what a spanking performance that was last week to demolish Western Sydney 5-1. Western Sydney were touted as potential premiers.
And it could have been more.
Yeah. It could have been more, indeed.
It could have been double digits.
Yes. So they take on, of course, Sydney, who had that narrow win burn against Melbourne Victory.
Yeah.
Credit to Melbourne Victory. They've had a lovely season as well.
They have.
But disappointing again. They lost in the semi-final. I'm completely with you, George. If you look at it objectively at the whole season, Melbourne City women was really the absolute dominating team. So they had 11 wins, 1 draw, and now a 5-1 in the semi-final. The only, if you want to see it from a Sydney FC perspective, what might give them a bit of hope is, look, they lost, for example, against Melbourne Victory, the Big Blue, a few weeks ago, but now they won the semi-final when it counted. Also last season, they didn't win the premiership and then became the champions, coming from behind. I mean, the other thing, I looked a little bit into statistics, and very interestingly, for example, if you look at the fouls, for example, won, so Sydney had 142 fouls won and Melbourne City just 105. On the other hand, successful passes more than, so it's a little bit number games, but successful passes for Melbourne City more than 6,500, whereas Sydney just 4,400. So you can see Melbourne City very dominating in terms of passing, but on the other hand, clean sheets were pretty similar in numbers as well. So that might be the little thing where there's a bit of hope.
The 1%ers.
Yeah, and also interesting, I mean, you have two Croatian coaches,
yes,
right? Vidosic against Juric.
Yes.
So let's say it like that, yeah, I would say 99% chance for Melbourne City, but it's a final, and as we all know in football,
anything
can happen in the final.
Well, Gabriel, in the one and only W League match this season, City edged out the Sky Blues 2-1 at Cromer Park in December, and it actually took a late second half strike from Milica Mijatovic. So, as you just read out in terms of the stats, Bert, not a lot separating the two teams, but I would still back Melbourne City.
Yeah, if you have 11 wins and 1 draw in the regular season and a 5-1 in the semi-final, you have to be the clear favorite, and you deserve to win, and you have to win.
Yes. I see where you're coming from, especially when it comes to the percentages and passing and numbers and all that sort of stuff. That's fine, but as long as the team scores, that's a different story. You can have as much possession as you want. You can have 99.9% of the possession of the game. You can still lose.
And that's what I want to say, the numbers are quite different.
Yeah.
And still they are facing each other in the final, and
I mean,
everything can happen.
But also at the same time, Melbourne City, with the likes of Lydia Williams, Steph Catley, Kaya Simon, Emily Van Egmond, my favourite player, Ellie Carpenter, Luik, they're all in the Matildas. They're all experienced campaigners. They've all been playing with each other for a very long time. Either it was club football or international football with the Matildas. So you can't beat that sort of experience. But, in sports history, regardless of what sport, regardless of what country, you can be easily the best team in the competition and win every game during this regular season and still get done in the grand final. So Sydney can still win, but like you said, with all the elements around the whole team, I think Melbourne City should win.
But the other thing, I think, big factor is in terms of that you have no spectators.
That's the shame about it all.
And that's something that can really have a big impact. I mean, we have seen it back in the EuroLeague. There were results, or remember Frankfurt against Basel, for example. So where you have no spectators, and then it is a little bit like a training game, right? And the vibes, everything is different. So maybe that's also the chance for Sydney FC.
Could be.
Yeah.
It's a shame that there's going to be no spectators, but we wish both teams all the very best, and hopefully it's going to be a really good game. But it should be, because the W League has been really good this season. So, hopefully the grand final is going to be even better. So, as we all know, the coronavirus has caused havoc with sports and daily life all over the globe. And on Monday, the FFA confirmed that the rest of the A-League season will go ahead with some minor scheduling tweaks, and all behind closed doors, despite grassroots and NPL matches being suspended. The decision by the federal government that all travellers to Australia arriving from Monday will have to self-isolate for a period of 14 days means that matches involving Melbourne Victory and Wellington Phoenix will not proceed in rounds 24 and 25. These matches will be rescheduled, and Wellington Phoenix will play all their matches in Australia for the remainder of the season. Gentlemen, what do you make of this decision?
Well,
quite a reasonable decision, I think, when you consider what's happened with other sports. The authorities have had to take a very prudent, careful approach. It's the players' health and safety that's paramount, as indeed the supporters, of course. It does put Wellington in a very, very compromising situation, because once they are out of quarantine, gentlemen, they'll play their first game 3 days later, on April the 4th, and then they have to squeeze their 6 remaining games, in less than 3 weeks. So, through no fault of their own, they have to be based in Sydney, and they've got all of this logjam of games, and hoping that they don't sustain any injuries and they don't lose match fitness and conditioning in the meantime. So, really challenging times ahead for all of the leading teams.
And honestly, I mean, I just can shake my head only with this whole decision. First of all, I mean, not the decision that if there are teams or people coming from overseas that they have to self-quarantine them. That's out of question. But what in the whole world makes it reasonable, or what justifies in the whole world? We have only 3 leagues worldwide, top leagues, that are still playing. It's Russia, it's Turkey, and it's Australia. So in Russia, there are a limited number of corona cases. Let's keep our fingers crossed over there. It stays as it is. But why in Australia do we still need to play A-League behind locked doors? In my opinion, you don't have a problem in terms of promotion and relegation. So if a team is at the bottom of the ladder, do they get promoted or relegated, right? So, and I guess to find a solution who will be the Champions League team is another thing. Is it a question about money? I expect the A-League anyway to be finished or to be stopped for unknown time, unknown period anyway. And I don't get it. With all respect, that everything else is stopped, but the A-League says no, we are just playing, and that behind closed doors, right? So I don't get it. And with all the circumstances that we have in Australia, which actually play now for our favor, to our favor in this situation, in my opinion, it's irresponsible.
So you're saying, Bernd, we should have awarded the title to Sydney?
I think
declared the competition null and void?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I read that funny story. We don't even have that problem. Your favorite team, Liverpool. What I saw today.
That. Oh my God, Bernd.
No, but what happened with Liverpool? Can you please remind me, Bernd?
No, this actually funny story that I assume that at once, or hopefully the Premier League will be finished, but it will be finished after the 1st of June, which means Liverpool will raise the trophy in Nike jerseys.
Yes,
and they were playing with New Balance last season. I mean, that's a little bit funny, but we don't have these problems here in Australia, as far as I understand. So just, as you said, declare the season as null and void. You don't have a champion. I think you can easily agree who should play Champions Leagues next season, because that's the only thing, in my opinion.
So you'd use last year's positions to determine next season's Champions League participation?
No, I would say, I mean, Sydney was so dominant that they at least definitely, and they would play Champions League anyway, right? I mean, Melbourne Victory doesn't have the right to play Champions League again. So I think the people should be reasonable enough, and nobody wants to play Champions League anyway. That's the impression you get from the clubs. So they might be even happy if they are not going to play.
Well, our supporters certainly don't. They go out and support it. I mean, you have to look at the crowds on a Wednesday night at Amy Park, where we're only getting 4,000, 5,000.
And then all this squeezing and then you're postponing, and you don't do favors to any people. And why you say A-League should play with all what's happening under these circumstances, that you expect the players that sooner or later probably will be involved in all of that, to say you concentrate on your job now and you go out there and play soccer.
Look, there may be pressure from Foxtel
that
they have to fulfil their contractual arrangements, because if Foxtel cancel their commitment to football in general, the A-League will collapse.
Yeah.
Well, that was primarily one of the concerns that the Players' Union had in regard to this whole coronavirus problem, because the Professional Footballers of Australia boss, John DeLuca, he actually called Fox Sports telling them just to please stick with us, because the players were afraid that Foxtel were going to rip the contract if they were going to cancel the season. So I'm actually flabbergasted that Foxtel has so much power and influence when it comes to the sport, when it comes to the A-League. But I'm also 100% with you, Bernd. I find this extremely arrogant and extremely obnoxious, not just from the FFA, but from the AFL, from the NRL, to think that this global pandemic that is happening is going to be immune from athletes. Athletes are human beings just like everybody else. They are capable of getting diseases like everybody else. This whole idea that because Australia needs to have sport in their life, like what the coach of Richmond, Damien Hardwick, said, this mentality is just so extremely obnoxious. I mean, we're dealing with people's lives here.
Yeah.
I just don't understand it. I mean, Bernd, you work in science and medicine and all that sort of stuff. Would you go to a conference next week?
Well, I'm not allowed to, right?
There
So,
you go. You're
and
not allowed to
yeah.
because, and you guys know, dealing in medicine, you guys know that it's risky, it's full of danger,
Yeah.
because your health and safety is paramount. Why is it that we've got these sporting events where you've got players touching each other, grabbing each other, they're in close contact with one another? Somehow they're going to be immune from the disease, but everybody else isn't. I just like how the NRL can have the balls disinfected during the game, but the players can still grab each other and tackle each other and all that. It is just so the lack of common sense is just alarming, and the fact that this whole thing is just dragging on, it's causing so much waste of energy and time and money and effort. And Melbourne Victory, they consulted with the federal government before they went to Wellington. While they were playing, they got a phone call from the federal government saying, no, you have to stay. So all the players were like, geez, what do we do? So they're stuck.
Yeah.
All this sort of stuff is happening. And to sort of answer what you were saying earlier, Bernd, about how they're going to finish the season, if it was me, I would be more than happy to say, look, Sydney FC, you're 10 points ahead of everybody. You've been clearly the best team. It would be a shame to not have a winner. There's no promotion, there's no relegation. Give them the toilet seat. Who cares? And you can have Melbourne City in the Champions League scene as their second, and whoever's third, they can do a playoff or whatever.
Yeah.
But this sort of lack of common sense, I mean, you've got all this time, all these months to sort of end everything, and you can organise who's going to be in the next second division. You can organise all that sort of stuff during that time. But I just, this lack of common sense is just, I'm just flabbergasted. I'm just gobsmacked by it.
And what are you going to do as soon as one player gets infected? God forbid that this is happening.
Well, then you have no choice but to cancel the season.
Yeah. So
realistically,
yeah, and the chances are quite high. I would say, again, hopefully it's not going to happen, but I have absolutely no understanding. Call the season off as everyone else worldwide has done, apart from 2 other countries, and then you have to deal with the consequences. I get that. I also get that a lot of jobs are involved in the A-League, but if you don't have the spectators there, and a lot of sportsmen from different sports, LeBron James, NBA said, I'm doing sports, I'm playing basketball for the fans, and if they are not there, then it's not the fun. I don't have the motivation, the emotions are not there. So, but the A-League thinks they are different.
Yeah, it is a very, very surreal situation for the whole community, not just the sporting community, but for everyone that goes about their daily business.
Yeah, well, hopefully common sense can prevail, but we'll see what happens. But unfortunately, we have to move on. So now to the upcoming games, because of the rescheduling due to the coronavirus, the following round is sort of like a patchwork quilt. First up, on Friday, it's Central Coast and Melbourne City. Who will win, George?
I'm tipping Melbourne City. It will be a tough match away from home. Anytime you have to travel to these far-flung places like Central Coast, very unhospitable, tough place to play. In saying that, Central Coast, I think they've lost 10 games in a row now, gentlemen.
I mean, I try to see the matches now under that aspect. It isn't home and away, because if there are no fans, right, it is like a training match wherever. So therefore I say, okay, the Mariners at home, but City is good enough to win that comfortably.
Didn't you say last week that Central Coast would break their duck? But
Yes.
then their losing run?
Yes, and I must admit I was terribly wrong.
Well, you would have been one of many, I think. But Central Coast at home, they could win, but I doubt it very, very much. I think Melbourne City are just too strong.
They do get, Gabriel, they do get Tommy Orr back, but they lose Daniel De Silva, so much of a muchness there.
Also on Friday, it's Brisbane Roar and Newcastle Jets. Who do you fancy, Bernd?
Well, Newcastle had really a good performance in Adelaide. Brisbane now, I think they have their season high in the ladder, and forgetting about home and away, draw.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to tip a Brisbane Roar victory. They've been on a very good run lately.
It will be a good game. I'm going to pat myself in the back for tipping Newcastle Jets last week. And I'm going to do the same. I think Newcastle are on a roll. I think they're going to win, but it's going to be a close one. Saturday, it's a Sydney derby between the Wanderers and Sydney FC. Who's your tip, George?
This one will be a draw. Western Sydney Wanderers, the last 4 or 5 weeks have been respectable. They've had some good wins, a couple of hiccups along the way, but Jean-Paul Demarini seems to have turned things around. He'll be boosted by the inclusion of Daniel Georgievski, returning from suspension. Brice Kamel, he's been promoted. And for Sydney FC, well, what can we say? They're the pace setters, deserved champions. This will be another good test for them. But I'm tipping a draw.
How sad without, again, fans, draw.
Yeah, totally agreed. It's going to be really bad without the fans there. I actually think it's probably a better derby than the Melbourne one, but I think Wanderers are going to make it 3-3 in the derby against Sydney FC. Monday it's Perth Glory and Western United. Bernd, who do you think will win?
Well, short answer, Perth.
I'm not so sure about that, Bernd. Western United, the bye last week, gentlemen, came at the worst possible time for them because they were getting some momentum, and Besart Berisha discovering his glory days. I'm going to tip a draw again.
Another draw?
Yes, another draw. I mean, Perth Glory, I can't believe they're in 5th spot.
Yeah, but at least they had now the draw against Sydney, and that was still a proper match. I mean, with fans and all of that. So Western United not consistent enough for me this season. That's why I'm going with Perth.
They do have 2 games less than some of the other sides.
Yeah.
In fairness.
Yeah, you both make very good points. I mean, Western United had that very good run, and now the bye came in at such a bad time. And Perth Glory, they've been a bit inconsistent, but at home, I'm going to tip Perth Glory. And later, Newcastle takes on Melbourne City. Who will win that one, George?
Well, I'm going to tip your team, Melbourne City, Gabrielle.
Oh, okay.
I can see that's put a smile on your face.
I'll have a draw for that.
You know what? Like, because of Newcastle's,
Yeah, tap yourself on the shoulder for Newcastle last weekend. Yeah.
I would like Melbourne City to win, but I don't know. Newcastle, they're playing differently than before. They're Roy O'Donovan. He should never have left Newcastle, it seems like, but he's finding his form again. But I think Newcastle might win that one actually. But yeah. Anyway, we have to leave it there for now. Thank you very much for listening to Football Access. Please take care out there. Hope to see you next week. Bye for now.
Thanks, guys. Have a good evening.
Thank you, gentlemen, and stay safe.